My name is Amelia, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a nurse at the local hospital and live in a small apartment in Maplewood Heights. I never thought my own parents would try to destroy my life, but sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most. It all started 3 years ago when my grandmother passed away. Grandma Rose was the sweetest woman you could ever meet. She raised me when my parents were too busy fighting or drinking to take care of me. While my mom and dad were out partying every night, Grandma Rose would help me with homework, make me soup when I was sick, and tell me bedtime stories. When I turned 18, I moved out of my parents' house and went to nursing school. Grandma Rose paid for everything because she believed in me. She would always say, "Amelia, you have a good heart. Help others and good things will come back to you." I tried my best to live by those words. My parents, Linda and Robert, never liked that I was close to Grandma Rose. They thought she spoiled me too much. But the truth was, they were just jealous that she chose to spend her time and money on me instead of them. They had wasted so many chances to be better people, and Grandma Rose was tired of their lies and broken promises. The day Grandma Rose died, I was holding her hand in the hospital. She squeezed my fingers and whispered, "The house is yours, sweetheart. I left everything to you in my will. Your parents don't deserve it after how they treated you." I cried so hard that day, not just because I lost the most important person in my life, but because I knew my parents would be angry about the inheritance. Grandma Rose had left me her beautiful house on Elm Street, her car, and about $50,000 in savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give me a fresh start. I planned to sell the house and use the money to buy a small place of my own, but my parents had other plans. The day after the funeral, they showed up at my apartment with angry faces and loud voices. "That house belongs to us," my mother screamed. "We're her children, not you. You tricked her into changing her will." I tried to explain that Grandma Rose made her own choices, but they wouldn't listen. My father pointed his finger at me and said, "You're going to give us that house, or we'll make you regret it." The way he said it made my skin crawl. These were the same people who forgot my birthday every year and never came to my nursing school graduation. For weeks, they called me every day demanding I sign over the house. They even showed up at my work, embarrassing me in front of my patients and coworkers. I finally had to change my phone number and ask security to keep them away from the hospital. I thought they would eventually give up, but I was wrong. 6 months later, I received papers in the mail that made my blood run cold. My parents were taking me to court. They claimed that I had manipulated Grandma Rose into changing her will. They said I was mentally unstable and that I had threatened to hurt myself if she didn't leave me everything. None of it was true, but as I read their lies on the legal papers, I realized how far they were willing to go. They had hired a lawyer and were prepared to destroy my reputation to get what they wanted. The worst part was that they had found people willing to lie for them in court. My hands shook as I read the names of their witnesses. Mrs. Patterson, our old neighbor, claimed she saw me screaming at Grandma Rose and calling her names. This was impossible because Mrs. Patterson had moved to Florida 2 years before Grandma Rose died. But somehow my parents had convinced her to lie for them. Their second witness was even worse. My own cousin Danny, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, said he would testify that I had told him about my plan to trick the old lady into giving me her money. Danny was a drug addict who would say anything for a few dollars, and apparently my parents had found his price. I felt sick reading their lies, but the third witness made me angry enough to fight back. They claimed that Officer Johnson, a police officer, had responded to multiple domestic disturbance calls at Grandma Rose's house because of my violent outbursts. This was the biggest lie of all, because I had never been violent in my life, and no police officer had ever come to Grandma Rose's house because of me. But I knew that most people would believe a police officer over me. My parents were counting on that. They thought they could overwhelm me with lies and fake witnesses until I gave up and handed over my inheritance. As I sat in my small apartment that night, holding the court papers and crying, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them win. Grandma Rose had trusted me with her final wishes, and I was going to honor them no matter what it cost me. I spent my savings on a lawyer named Mr. Williams. He was kind but honest about my situation. "Your parents have built a strong case with these witnesses," he told me. "We need to find proof that they're lying, or we might lose everything." That's when I remembered something important. Grandma Rose had always been careful about keeping records of everything. She had a filing cabinet in her basement filled with papers, photos, and documents going back decades. If there was proof that my parents were lying, it would be in that basement. The next morning, I drove to Grandma Rose's house with my heart pounding. As I walked through the rooms filled with her things, I could almost hear her voice encouraging me to be strong. I spent hours going through her files, looking for anything that could help my case. In the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, I found something that made my hands tremble. It was a thick folder labeled Linda and Robert Problems. Inside were copies of every loan she had given my parents over the years, along with letters they had written begging for money. But more importantly, there were photos and documents that proved they had been lying about their relationship with me. But as I was reading through the papers, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I saw my parents walking up the driveway with two men I didn't recognize. One of them was carrying a crowbar, and they all looked angry and determined. I quickly grabbed the folder and ran toward the back door, but it was too late. I heard the front door being kicked open, and my father's voice echoed through the house. "We know you're in here, Amelia! You're going to give us what's ours, one way or another." My heart was beating so fast, I thought it might explode. I clutched the folder to my chest and looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The basement. I could hear my parents and the two strange men stomping through the house above me as I quietly opened the basement door and crept down the wooden stairs. "Check every room," my mother's voice shrieked from upstairs. "She has to be here somewhere. Her car is outside." I found a small space behind the old water heater and squeezed myself into it, trying not to make any noise. The folder was pressed against my body, and I could feel the important papers inside that might save my case. Through the thin basement ceiling, I could hear them throwing things around and breaking furniture. "Where are those papers?" my father yelled. "She must have taken something from here." One of the strange men had a deep, scary voice. Maybe she already found what she was looking for. "We should have come here sooner." "Just keep looking," my mother snapped. "That little brat thinks she's so smart, but she has no idea what we're capable of." I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Finally, I heard them leave, slamming the front door so hard that the whole house shook. I waited another 20 minutes before I dared to come out of my hiding spot. When I finally went upstairs, I gasped at what I saw. They had destroyed everything. Grandma Rose's beautiful furniture was overturned. Her pictures were thrown on the floor with broken glass everywhere, and they had even torn apart her favorite chair looking for hidden papers. But they hadn't found what they were looking for because I had it safely in my hands. As I drove home that day, I felt scared but also determined. My parents had just shown me exactly what kind of people they really were, and I was more convinced than ever that I had to fight them. Back at my apartment, I spread out all the papers from Grandma Rose's folder on my kitchen table. What I found made me both sad and angry. There were letters from my parents dating back 15 years, all asking Grandma Rose for money. In one letter, my father wrote, "We promise this is the last time we'll ask for help. We're going to get our lives together and pay you back every penny." But the dates on the letters showed they had written the same promises over and over again. They had borrowed money for car repairs, medical bills, rent, and even vacations. Grandma Rose had given them over $25,000 over the years, and they had never paid back a single penny. Even worse, I found a letter my mother had written just 6 months before Grandma Rose died. In it, she complained that Grandma Rose was wasting money on Amelia's nursing school, and that the money should go to her real children instead. She had written, "Amelia doesn't deserve your help. She's just using you to get free money for college. But the most important thing I found was a small notebook where Grandma Rose had written down every interaction she'd had with my parents. The entries painted a clear picture of people who only visited when they needed money and who had never shown her real love or respect. One entry from 2 years ago made me cry. Grandma Rose had written, "Linda called today asking for $3,000 for Robert's gambling debts. When I said no, she screamed at me and said I was a terrible mother. I told her I was saving my money for Amelia's education, and Linda said some very hurtful things about my granddaughter. I don't think I can trust them anymore." I took all of this evidence to Mr. Williams, my lawyer. He looked through everything carefully and nodded with approval. "This is very good, Amelia. It shows that your parents had a pattern of taking advantage of your grandmother, and it proves they were angry about her supporting you instead of them. But will it be enough to prove they're lying about me?" I asked. Mr. Williams frowned. "It helps, but we still need to deal with our witnesses. Mrs. Patterson, your cousin Danny, and especially this Officer Johnson. People tend to believe police officers, even when they're lying." That's when I had an idea. What if Officer Johnson isn't lying? What if my parents are lying about what he said? "What do you mean?" Mr. Williams asked. "What if there really is an Officer Johnson, but he never said what my parents claim he said? What if they're putting words in his mouth?" Mr. Williams' eyes lit up. "That's a very good point. Let me make some phone calls." 3 days later, Mr. Williams called me with exciting news. "I found Officer Johnson," he said, "and you were right. He does exist, and he does remember your grandmother's house. But he never responded to any domestic disturbance calls there. In fact, he only visited the house once, and it was to check on your grandmother after a neighbor reported seeing someone suspicious in her yard. So, my parents are lying about what he said." "Completely. And here's the best part. Officer Johnson is angry that they're using his name in court without his permission. He's agreed to testify for us and tell the truth about what really happened." I felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. Finally, I had a real witness who could prove my parents were lying. But my happiness didn't last long. The next day, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was my cousin Danny, and he sounded scared. "Amelia, I need to tell you something," he said in a shaky voice. "Your parents, they didn't just ask me to lie for them. They threatened me." "What do you mean?" "They said if I didn't testify against you, they would tell the police that I was dealing drugs. They have photos of me with some bad people, and they said they would make sure I went to prison." My stomach dropped. "Danny, are you dealing drugs?" "No. I mean, I used to have problems, but I've been clean for 8 months now. But those photos are from before I got clean, and your parents are threatening to use them against me." "So you're going to lie about me in court?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to, Amelia. You've never done anything wrong to me. But I can't go to prison. I have a little daughter now, and I can't lose her." After Danny hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling hopeless again. Even though I had Officer Johnson on my side, I knew that Danny's testimony would be very damaging. A family member saying I had confessed to tricking Grandma Rose would be hard to argue against. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The following morning, as I was getting ready for work, I heard a loud knock on my door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a tall man in a dark suit. "Are you Amelia Richardson?" he asked, showing me an official-looking badge. "Yes, that's me." "I'm US Marshal David Hayes. I need to talk to you about your court case." I stared at the US Marshal in complete shock. His badge looked real, and his serious expression made my stomach twist with worry. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, stepping back from the door. "No, you're not in trouble," Marshal Hayes said gently. "But I have some information that might help your case. May I come in?" I nodded and led him to my small living room. He sat down on my couch and pulled out a notebook. "I understand your parents are claiming that Officer Johnson responded to domestic disturbance calls at your grandmother's house." Yes, but that's not true. My lawyer found Officer Johnson, and he said he never responded to any calls like that. Marshal Hayes nodded. That's correct. But there's more to this story that you need to know. He opened his notebook and looked at his notes. 3 weeks ago, your father contacted our office claiming that someone was impersonating a police officer. He said this fake officer had been harassing your family and that he was worried about your safety. I felt confused. I don't understand. What does that have to do with my case? Your father gave us Officer Johnson's name and said this officer had been acting strangely around your grandmother's house. He asked us to investigate whether Officer Johnson was really a police officer or someone pretending to be one. My heart started beating faster. What did you find out? Officer Johnson is definitely real, and he's a good cop with a clean record. But when we talked to him about your father's complaint, he told us something very interesting. He said your father had called him several times, asking him to lie in court about domestic disturbance calls that never happened. I gasped. My father tried to get Officer Johnson to lie for him? That's right. Officer Johnson refused, so your father came to us, hoping we would find something wrong with the officer that he could use in court. When we didn't find anything, your father got angry and threatened to file a complaint against Officer Johnson for harassment. Marshal Hayes closed his notebook and looked at me seriously. Your father made a big mistake when he involved federal officers in his plan. What he's doing is called witness tampering, and it's a serious crime. But more importantly for your case, I witnessed him trying to manipulate the legal system. Does this mean you'll testify for me in court? I'm planning to. But first, I need to tell you about something else your parents have been doing. Marshal Hayes pulled out a folder from his briefcase. We've been watching your parents for the past 2 weeks because their behavior raised some red flags. What we found might shock you. He opened the folder and showed me several photographs. In the pictures, I could see my parents meeting with different people in parking lots and coffee shops. These people are all willing to lie in court for money, Marshal Hayes explained. Your parents have been paying people to create false testimonies against you. One photo showed my mother handing cash to a woman I didn't recognize. This woman was going to testify that she saw you stealing money from your grandmother's purse, but she's never met you or your grandmother. Your parents found her through a friend and paid her $500 to lie. Another photo showed my father talking to a man in a restaurant. This man was going to say he worked at a bank where your grandmother had an account. He was going to claim that you had been forging checks and stealing money from her account. But he's never worked at any bank. He's actually unemployed and needed the money your parents offered him. I felt sick looking at these pictures. How many people were they planning to use? We counted at least 6 fake witnesses, plus the 3 you already know about. Your parents were building an entire case based on lies and paid testimonies. Marshal Hayes put the photos back in the folder. But here's the thing, Amelia. When people commit crimes while trying to win a court case, it usually means they know they don't have a real case. Your parents wouldn't need to lie and cheat if they actually had a legal right to your grandmother's house. For the first time in months, I felt like someone really understood what I was going through. So, you believe that my grandmother really wanted me to have the house? Based on everything I've seen, yes. Your parents' behavior shows they know they don't have a legitimate claim, so they're trying to create one through lies and intimidation. Marshal Hayes stood up to leave, but then he turned back to me. There's one more thing you should know. Your cousin Danny came to see us yesterday. Danny talked to you? He was scared about the threats your parents made, so he contacted our office for help. He told us everything about how they're forcing him to lie about you. He also gave us copies of text messages where your parents threatened to plant drugs in his car if he didn't cooperate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They threatened to plant drugs on Danny. That's a federal crime, Amelia. Your parents have crossed a line from simple family disputes into serious criminal behavior. Danny is now under our protection, and he's going to tell the truth in court instead of lying for your parents. After Marshal Hayes left, I called Mr. Williams immediately and told him everything. He was so excited he could barely speak. This changes everything, Amelia. With a US Marshal testifying about your parents' witness tampering and criminal threats, their whole case will fall apart. But what about Mrs. Patterson? She's still going to lie about seeing me yell at Grandma Rose. Don't worry about her. I did some checking, and Mrs. Patterson moved to Florida 3 months before your grandmother died. Not 2 years like we thought. I have her medical records, showing she was in a Florida hospital during the time she claims she saw you threatening your grandmother. I felt a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I might actually win. But I should have known that my parents wouldn't give up without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to find my car covered in red paint. Someone had also thrown rocks through my apartment windows during the night. There was a note on my door that said, "Drop the case or things will get worse." I called Marshal Hayes right away, and he came over with 2 other federal agents. They took pictures of everything and told me I would be under protection until the court case was over. "Your parents are getting desperate," Marshal Hayes said as he examined the note. "This kind of intimidation proves they know they're going to lose." But that afternoon, something happened that made me realize just how far my parents were willing to go. I was at work when my supervisor called me into her office with a worried expression. "Amelia, I just got a very disturbing phone call," she said. "Someone called claiming to be from the state nursing board. They said there were complaints about you stealing medications from patients and that your nursing license was being investigated." My blood ran cold. That's not true. I would never steal from patients. I know that, which is why I called the nursing board myself. They have no complaints against you and no investigation. Someone was impersonating an official to try to get you fired. I knew immediately who was behind this. My parents were trying to destroy my career and my reputation so that even if I won the court case, I would have nothing left. That evening, as I sat in my apartment with a federal agent watching my door, I realized that tomorrow's court hearing would determine not just who got Grandma Rose's house, but whether my parents would face serious criminal charges for everything they had done. I tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about what Marshal Hayes had told me. The courtroom would be full of people who had been paid to lie about me, but now the truth was finally going to come out. Just before midnight, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Amelia." It was my mother's voice, but she sounded different, scared and angry at the same time. "We need to talk. Meet us at Grandma Rose's house in 1 hour, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." I stared at my phone after my mother hung up, my hand shaking. The federal agent sitting in my living room looked at me with concern. "Who was that?" Agent Martinez asked. "My mother. She wants me to meet them at my grandmother's house." I showed him the phone number. She said, "I'll regret it if I don't come." Agent Martinez immediately called Marshal Hayes, who arrived at my apartment within 20 minutes. "This is exactly what we were expecting," he said grimly. "Your parents know their case is falling apart, and they're making one last desperate move." "I'm not going to meet them," I said firmly. "It's obviously a trap." "Actually," Marshal Hayes said with a slight smile, "I think you should go, but not alone, and not the way they're expecting." He explained his plan to me. I would go to Grandma Rose's house, but federal agents would be hidden around the property. They would record everything my parents said, which could be used as evidence of more threats and intimidation. "If they're planning to hurt you or threaten you, we'll have it all on tape," Marshal Hayes said. "And if they try to make you sign papers or confess to things you didn't do, we'll be there to protect you." An hour later, I pulled up to Grandma Rose's house with my heart pounding. Even though I knew federal agents were watching from hidden positions, I felt scared walking up the driveway. The house looked dark and scary in the moonlight, nothing like the warm, happy place it had been when Grandma Rose was alive. The front door was slightly open, and I could see light coming from the living room. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, calling out, "Mom? Dad, I'm here." "In here?" My father's voice came from the living room. When I walked into the room, I gasped. My parents were sitting on the couch, but they weren't alone. The two strange men who had broken into the house with them before were standing by the windows, and there was a third man I didn't recognize sitting in Grandma Rose's favorite chair. "Sit down, Amelia," my mother said coldly. "We need to have a serious conversation." I remained standing near the doorway, ready to run if I needed to. "What do you want?" The stranger in Grandma Rose's chair spoke up. "My name is Frank Morrison, and I'm a lawyer. Your parents hired me to make you a final offer." "I already have a lawyer," I said. "Not like me," Frank Morrison said with a nasty smile. "I specialize in making problems disappear. Your parents are willing to let you keep $10,000 from your grandmother's estate if you sign over everything else to them tonight. And if I don't?" My father stood up, and I could see he had been drinking. "Then tomorrow in court, you're going to hear things about yourself that will destroy your life forever. We found people who will swear you were stealing drugs from the hospital where you work. We also found someone who will testify that you threatened to kill your grandmother if she didn't change her will," my mother added. "A nurse who worked at the hospital where the old lady died." I felt my stomach drop. Even though I knew these were lies, I realized how convincing they might sound to a judge. "You're making all of this up." "Prove it," Frank Morrison said. "In court tomorrow, it's going to be your word against multiple witnesses. Who do you think the judge will believe?" One of the strange men by the window stepped forward. "Or maybe you'll have an accident before you can get to court. Maybe you'll slip and fall down some stairs. Or maybe your car will have brake problems." I knew I was being recorded, but hearing these threats still made me feel terrified. "You can't threaten me like this." "We're not threatening you," my mother said sweetly. "We're just explaining what might happen if you don't make the smart choice. Sign the papers, take the money, and walk away. Otherwise, your life is going to become very difficult." Frank Morrison pulled out a stack of legal documents and put them on the coffee table. "These papers transfer ownership of the house, car, and all remaining money to your parents. All you have to do is sign them, and this whole mess goes away." I looked at the papers and thought about Grandma Rose. She had trusted me with her final wishes, and she had specifically said my parents didn't deserve her house. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. My father's face turned red with anger. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you." "You've never done anything for me," I said, feeling braver now. "Grandma Rose raised me while you were too busy drinking and partying to care about your own daughter." "That's it," my father shouted, moving toward me. "You're going to sign those papers right now, or I'm going to make you sign them." But before he could reach me, the front door burst open, and Marshal Hayes ran in with 3 other federal agents. "Federal agents, everyone put your hands where we can see them." The room exploded into chaos. The 2 strange men by the windows tried to run, but agents were already coming through the back door. Frank Morrison jumped up from his chair and tried to grab the legal papers, but Agent Martinez was faster. "Robert and Linda Richardson, you're under arrest for witness tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making terroristic threats," Marshal Hayes announced as he handcuffed my father. My mother started screaming. "This is entrapment. You can't arrest us for having a conversation with our own daughter." "We can when that conversation includes death threats and attempts to force someone to sign legal documents under duress," Marshal Hayes replied calmly. Frank Morrison was also being handcuffed. "I want to call my lawyer," he said. "You are a lawyer," Agent Martinez replied, "and you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and practicing law without a license in this state." As the agents led my parents and their accomplices out of the house, Marshal Hayes turned to me. "Are you okay, Amelia?" I nodded, but I was shaking all over. "Is it really over?" The criminal part is just beginning, but your civil case is definitely over. With the recordings we just made, plus all the evidence we already had, your parents have no chance of winning tomorrow. In fact, I doubt they'll even show up to court. The next morning, I sat in the courtroom with Mr. Williams, waiting for the hearing to begin. As Marshal Hayes had predicted, my parents didn't show up. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood up and told the judge that his clients were withdrawing their case. "Your Honor, my clients have decided not to pursue this matter any further," he said, looking embarrassed. The judge looked confused. "Mr. Peterson, this is highly unusual. Your clients have been fighting this case for months, and now they're just dropping it." "Yes, Your Honor. They've had a change of heart." The judge turned to Mr. Williams. "Does your client have any objection to this dismissal?" Mr. Williams stood up with a big smile. "No objection, Your Honor. We're happy to accept the dismissal." And just like that, it was over. The judge officially dismissed the case, which meant I got to keep everything Grandma Rose had left me. But more importantly, it meant that her final wishes had been respected. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Marshal Hayes was waiting for me on the steps. "Congratulations, Amelia," he said. "Justice was served today. What's going to happen to my parents?" "They're facing serious federal charges. The witness tampering alone could get them several years in prison. And with all the evidence we have, I don't think they'll be able to make a deal." I felt sad thinking about my parents going to prison, but I also felt relieved that they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else the way they had hurt me. "There's something else you should know," Marshal Hayes continued. "Your cousin Danny asked me to give you this." He handed me a letter. Inside, Danny had written an apology for almost lying about me in court. He thanked me for not being angry with him and promised to stay clean and be a better person. At the bottom of the letter, he had written, "Your grandmother would be proud of how you fought for what was right." 6 months later, I was sitting in Grandma Rose's house, my house now, looking through old photo albums. I had decided not to sell the house, after all. Instead, I moved in and made it my home. Every room held memories of the woman who had loved me unconditionally and taught me to always do the right thing. My parents had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. They had also been ordered to pay back all the money they had borrowed from Grandma Rose over the years. Danny had gotten into a drug treatment program and was doing well. Officer Johnson had been promoted after his honest testimony helped expose the corruption in my parents' case. But the biggest surprise came when I was cleaning out Grandma Rose's attic and found a box of letters she had written but never sent. They were letters to me, written over the years I was in nursing school. In them, she talked about how proud she was of me and how she knew I would always fight for what was right. The last letter was dated just a week before she died. In it, she wrote, "My dear Amelia, I know that your parents will try to take what I've left you. But I also know that you're strong enough to fight them. You have something they don't have, a good heart and the courage to stand up for the truth. No matter what happens, remember that good people always win in the end, because good people have good people helping them." As I read those words, I realized that Grandma Rose had been right. When I needed help the most, good people had appeared to help me, Mr. Williams, Officer Johnson, Marshal Hayes, and even Danny when he finally found the courage to tell the truth. I had learned that revenge isn't about hurting people who hurt you. Real revenge is living a good life and being the kind of person who attracts other good people. My parents had tried to destroy me with their lies and greed, but in the end, their own actions had destroyed them instead. Now I live in Grandma Rose's house, working as a nurse and helping other people every day. Sometimes I see patients whose families are fighting over money or property, and I always tell them the same thing Grandma Rose told me. Be kind to others, because kindness always comes back to you when you need it most. And every night before I go to sleep, I say a little prayer of thanks for the US Marshal who stepped forward to expose the truth, and for the grandmother who taught me that good people never fight alone. 2 years after the court case ended, I thought my life had finally returned to normal. I was working at the hospital, living peacefully in Grandma Rose's house, and slowly healing from everything my parents had put me through. I had even started dating a wonderful man named Anthony, who was a teacher at the local elementary school. But sometimes the past has a way of catching up with you when you least expect it. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the phone call that changed everything again. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang and I saw it was Marshal Hayes calling. "Amelia, I need to see you as soon as possible," he said, and his voice sounded urgent. "Can you meet me at the Federal Building this afternoon? Is everything okay? Are my parents causing trouble again?" "It's not about your parents directly, but it is connected to your case. I'll explain everything when you get here." I spent the whole day at work worrying about what Marshal Hayes wanted to tell me. When I finally arrived at the Federal Building that afternoon, he was waiting for me with a serious expression and a thick folder in his hands. "Amelia, what I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking," he said as we sat down in his office. "We've been investigating your parents' lawyer, Frank Morrison, and we discovered something that changes everything about your case." He opened the folder and showed me a stack of legal documents. Frank Morrison wasn't just helping your parents try to steal your inheritance. He's been running a much bigger operation, helping families steal inheritances from their own relatives all across the country. My mouth fell open. "You mean other families are going through what I went through?" "At least 20 families that we know of, maybe more. Morrison has a whole system set up. He finds families where elderly people have left money to grandchildren or other relatives instead of their own children. Then he helps the angry family members create fake witnesses and false evidence to contest the wills." Marshal Hayes pulled out a map with red pins stuck all over it. Each of these pins represents a family that Morrison has helped steal an inheritance. In every case, the pattern is the same. Fake witnesses, made-up stories about the deceased person being manipulated, and threats against the rightful heirs. I felt sick thinking about all the people who had been hurt the way I was hurt. "How did you find out about this?" "After we arrested Morrison in your case, we started looking into his other clients. What we found was shocking. Morrison has helped steal over $2 million from families across 5 different states. Marshal Hayes showed me photos of some of the victims. There was an elderly man in Texas whose children had stolen his house after he left it to his nephew. There was a woman in Ohio whose brothers had taken her inheritance after she cared for their sick father for 10 years. Story after story of families torn apart by greed and lies. The worst part is that Morrison was very good at what he did," Marshal Hayes continued. "Before your case, he had never lost. Families would spend all their money fighting these fake cases, and then they would give up when they couldn't afford lawyers anymore. What made my case different? 2 things saved you, Amelia. First, your parents got so desperate that they committed federal crimes right in front of us. If they had been smarter about their lies, they might have gotten away with it. Second, you never gave up fighting, even when things looked hopeless." Marshal Hayes closed the folder and looked at me seriously. "But here's why I called you today. We're building a case against Morrison and his whole network, but we need victims to testify about what happened to them. Your testimony could help us put him away for a very long time and help other families get their inheritances back." "Of course I'll testify," I said without hesitation. "If it helps other people who went through what I went through, I'll do whatever you need." "There's something else," Marshal Hayes said, and he looked uncomfortable. "Morrison is fighting the charges, and his new lawyer is claiming that he was just doing his job as a lawyer. They're saying that all of his clients really believed their cases were legitimate. That's ridiculous. He knew my parents were lying." "I know that, and you know that, but we need to prove it in court. Morrison's lawyer is very good, and he's going to argue that Morrison was just representing his clients' interests, not helping them commit crimes." Over the next few months, I found myself back in the world of lawyers and court cases. But this time I was helping to fight for justice instead of fighting for my own survival. I met with other victims of Morrison's scheme, and their stories broke my heart. There was Jennifer, a young mother from Alabama whose stepfather had stolen her inheritance from her grandmother. Morrison had helped the stepfather create fake witnesses who claimed Jennifer was a drug addict who had threatened her grandmother. Jennifer lost her case and had to work 3 jobs to support her children. There was Michael, a military veteran from Colorado whose own sister had stolen their father's house. Morrison had helped the sister claim that Michael had mental problems from his time in the Army and that their father had been afraid of him. Michael ended up homeless and living in his car. Each victim had the same story: families who had been torn apart by greed, with Morrison helping the greedy relatives create elaborate lies to steal what didn't belong to them. But unlike my case, these families hadn't had a US Marshal watching when their relatives made threats and broke laws. The trial began 6 months later, and I was one of the first witnesses called to testify. As I sat in the witness chair, I looked out at the courtroom and saw Morrison sitting at the defendant's table. He looked older and more tired than I remembered, but he still had that same cold look in his eyes. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chin, asked me to tell the jury exactly what had happened in my case. I talked about my parents' lies, the fake witnesses, and the threats they had made. But most importantly, I talked about how Morrison had been the one organizing everything. He wasn't just representing my parents, I explained to the jury. He was actively helping them create fake evidence and coaching them on how to lie in court. He even brought fake legal documents to try to force me to sign over my inheritance. Morrison's lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, tried to make me look like I was lying or confused about what had happened. He asked me hundreds of questions, trying to trip me up or make me contradict myself. But I had lived through this nightmare, and I knew exactly what had happened. "Miss Richardson," Mr. Blackwood said in a sneaky voice, "isn't it possible that my client was just doing his job as a lawyer? Isn't it possible that your parents really believed they deserved your grandmother's house?" "No," I said firmly. "Your client wasn't just doing his job. He was helping my parents commit crimes. He brought men to threaten me. He helped them create fake witnesses, and he tried to force me to sign papers under duress. That's not what lawyers are supposed to do." The trial lasted 3 weeks, and I testified 2 more times. Each time, Morrison's lawyer tried to make it seem like I was exaggerating or making things up. But Marshal Hayes also testified, and he had recordings of everything my parents and Morrison had done. The other victims testified too, and their stories painted a clear picture of Morrison's criminal operation. Jennifer broke down crying when she talked about losing her children's college money. Michael had to be helped from the courtroom when he described becoming homeless because of Morrison's lies. But the most powerful testimony came from someone I didn't expect. On the final day of the trial, the prosecutor called a surprise witness, Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had been paid to lie about me in my original case. Mrs. Patterson walked slowly to the witness stand, and I could see she was nervous. She was much older than I remembered, and she looked scared. "Mrs. Patterson," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the jury about your involvement in the Richardson case." Mrs. Patterson looked down at her hands and spoke in a quiet voice. "I was living in Florida when Mr. Morrison contacted me. He said he needed me to testify about things I had seen at Rose Richardson's house, but I told him I had moved to Florida before Rose died." "What did Mr. Morrison say to that?" "He said it didn't matter. He said he would pay me $1,000 if I would just say what he told me to say. He said nobody would check the dates and that I would be helping a nice family get what they deserved." Mrs. Patterson looked up at Morrison with tears in her eyes. "I needed the money for my medical bills, so I agreed to lie. But I want everyone to know that I never saw Amelia do anything wrong. She was always a sweet girl who loved her grandmother very much." The courtroom was completely silent as Mrs. Patterson continued. "After I agreed to lie, Mr. Morrison sent me a script of exactly what to say in court. He told me to memorize it and to stick to the story no matter what anyone asked me." Morrison's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed Mrs. Patterson to continue. "I couldn't go through with it. she said, wiping her eyes. The night before I was supposed to testify, I realized I was helping to hurt an innocent girl who had already lost her grandmother. I called Mr. Morrison and told him I wouldn't lie anymore, but he threatened to have me arrested for taking his money. What did you do then? I gave the money back and refused to testify, but I've felt guilty about it ever since. I should have come forward sooner to tell the truth about what Mr. Morrison asked me to do. When Mrs. Patterson finished testifying, I saw several jury members wiping their eyes. Even Morrison looked shaken by her testimony. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before they came back with their verdict. We find the defendant, Frank Morrison, guilty on all charges, the jury foreman announced. Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back all the money he had helped steal from families. More importantly, the judge ordered that all of Morrison's cases be reviewed, which meant that families like Jennifer and Michael might get their inheritances back. After the trial ended, I stood outside the courthouse with Marshal Hayes and some of the other victims. We had all been through terrible experiences, but we had also helped make sure that Morrison could never hurt anyone else. "Thank you for never giving up," Jennifer said to me, hugging me tightly. "If you hadn't fought so hard in your case, Morrison would still be out there hurting families." "Grandma Rose always told me that good people have to look out for each other," I replied. "She would be proud that we helped stop him." Marshal Hayes shook my hand and smiled. "Your grandmother was right about you, Amelia. You do have a good heart, and you used it to help a lot of people get justice." As I drove home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened over the past 3 years. I had started this journey just trying to honor my grandmother's wishes, but I had ended up helping dozens of families get their lives back. When I got home, I found a package waiting on my doorstep. Inside was a letter from Michael, the veteran who had been made homeless by Morrison's scheme. He wrote that because of our trial, he had gotten his father's house back and was finally able to start rebuilding his life. "You probably don't remember me from the trial," he wrote, "but your courage gave me the strength to keep fighting. I wanted you to know that I'm doing better now, and I'm working to help other veterans who have been cheated out of their benefits." I smiled as I read his letter, remembering something else Grandma Rose used to say: when you help one person, you help everyone that person will help in the future. That night, I sat in Grandma Rose's favorite chair and looked around at the house that had caused so much trouble but had also brought so much justice. I realized that this had never really been about the house or the money. It had been about doing what was right, even when it was hard. My parents were still in prison, but I had stopped feeling angry about that. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. I had chosen to fight for the truth, and that choice had not only saved my inheritance, but had also helped many other families. I had learned that revenge doesn't mean hurting people who hurt you. Real revenge is living a good life and using your experiences to help others. My parents had tried to destroy me, but instead their actions had turned me into someone who could help protect other people from the same kind of harm. And every night before I went to sleep, I still said a prayer of thanks for the US Marshal who had stepped forward to expose the truth, and for the grandmother who had taught me that good people never fight alone. The best revenge, I had learned, was becoming the kind of person who makes the world a little bit better for everyone.